Okay. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. I believe this is our last corporate services before we switch over. Is that right, clerk? Right. So this is our last time together in this configuration. Some of us will be back by popular demand under a new configuration with a new chair sometime in early December, I believe. So, okay. I'll look for any disclosures of pecuniary interest. Seeing none, I'll look for items that people want pulled out of consent. No one wants anything pulled out of consent? Councillor Helmer.
4?
Yep.
I think that's it. I have comments about 3.
You have a comment about which one?
3, but it doesn't need to be pulled.
Okay. All right, so floor has been pulled. There's a comment on 3, so I'll take a mover on 2, 3, 5, 6, 7, and 8. And a seconder if we could. Councillor Helmer, your comment on 3.
Thank you, and through the chair to our staff, I'm really happy to see this report coming forward. I know that's responding to a direction back in May, and glad to about a number of things. First, that the response rate when we did the voluntary disclosure for the new hires more recently, it was really high, and I think that's a really very good sign, and I think bodes well for ongoing data collection efforts. Also, that we went back, to try and find out from people we'd hired in the recent past, back to when that resolution was there, recognizing obviously that I think the response rate was going to be lower, and I think it was still worth doing. And also, I think the results are quite interesting. I think it's helpful for people to see that, to see what the makeup of the new hires is, how they vary across different dimensions. And I think it gives us something to look at as we're proceeding with the recruiting on an ongoing basis. I know that this was something that Councillor Salee really raised earlier, and I'm sure he's glad to see it coming forward so quickly, frankly, now that people have mobilized around it. So I just wanted to say to our staff, I really appreciate the report.
Yes, thank you. And of course, the recommendation from the people that we have collecting the information is that the report happen once a year, or sorry, twice a year instead of 4 times a year, out of respect for the people that might lose anonymity if it were to happen and we only hired a couple people.
And if I may, from the chair, I have one concern on the data collection, particularly with respect to temporary casuals. Because our temporary casuals often come back year over year, we need to have some controls in place, and I'm sure they are in place to ensure that we are not double counting in a sense. So because we have 4 years, we could have the same person for 4 years. We want to make sure that it's discrete hires, not repeated hires, if you could, on the casual. Am I correct, Mr. Cox said that those controls are in place?
Good question. I don't know, but we'll check it and make sure as we go forward. Thanks. Salia Khan would be pleased to answer that question.
So through the chair, what we have put in place moving forward is the process on data collection for the individuals who are going to be considered as either new hires or even return hires. So they will have to identify that. And this is something that we're currently working on just to ensure exactly that there's no kind of double jeopardy as far as the numbers are concerned.
And I would assume if they advance from being, say, a casual or temporary to a permanent part or full-time, we'd catch them in that new category. Good, that's great. Okay, thank you very much. I'll call the question on the items that are on the floor.
Motion carries 5-0.
Okay, we'll deal with item number 4 at this time, which is the vacant unit rebate and vacant excess land subclass tax reduction. And this is, I might turn to Ms. Barbone to introduce some of the scope of the issue that we're looking at here, and maybe some suggestions on how we work. This is an important policy decision, and we need to deal with this, okay? Ms. Barbone.
Thank you, and through the chair, so just to kind of highlight for you what we've brought forward for you today. So earlier this year, we had brought forward the policy potential change with respect to the vacancy rebate and the subclass reduction. So further to that introduction to council, we did some consultation. The Chamber of Commerce was very gracious in assisting us hold a session to provide further information to people that were impacted. We provided the letters and to ensure that people that currently who have received a rebate were aware of the changes as well. So we've included in the report brought forward to you today a summary of the feedback that we've heard, what we've heard from the BIAs, the Chamber as well as some other consultation that we've done. One of the key things was also looking at what other municipalities have done. So this report does summarize. There are a large number of municipalities that have phased it out. There are some that are still in process of consultation. So there are various degrees throughout the Ontario that have moved forward with this. So what we've essentially done is taken the feedback, taken what other municipalities have done, and provided a list of 8 options for council's consideration, which basically range from elimination of the program all the way through to continuing on with the program as it is now. So I think if, we'd be happy to answer any questions or clarification if you have anything on there, but I think definitely that, you could make no decision as well if you choose not to go forward and want to wait to see what other municipalities do, all the way to complete elimination. So there's many varying policy decisions that you could do, and we will be happy to answer any questions.
Okay, I'll look to colleagues. Councillor Park, Councillor Morgan.
Thank you very much. In terms of where the staff recommendation is going with option number 8, I'm not entirely sure that I'm sold on that. I think that one municipality in Ontario has to stick their neck out, and I don't see why it can't be London. As most people know, the BIA, Downtown London BIA, hired a firm called Live, Work, Learn, Play to do an assessment of the downtown. Throughout that assessment, they found that there is approximately about an 18% office vacancy in the downtown. They found that one property owner owns 50% of that vacancy. So that's one of the biggest issues we face in the downtown. Some of the feedback that we've gotten from the BIAs was talking about how do we reuse these dollars toward another end, and that could be heritage preservation. As we all know, in the downtown and in particular, heritage structures are the properties that are facing that pressure the most forcefully with regard to there's not available space of developable land in the downtown. So I'm curious why that didn't get incorporated into the recommendation about what do we actually use these dollars for if we're not actually giving out the rebate going forward. And the recommendation, just to note and file that feedback, I think that we could do something with that. So I'd just like some comments on that. Thank you.
Ms. Barbone.
I'll start, and if Mr. Logan has anything else to add, he can jump in. So essentially, based on that, so one of the, I think when we look at some of the changes, certainly if council wished to end the program, you could, if you wanted to take the savings and reinvest that into something else, that's certainly one of the options that could be considered outside of, so I think that would be a separate policy decision. That I think one of the options we did look at was if council chooses to end the program, you could take those savings and reinvest it into something different. So whether that would be some sort of economic development program or investing into heritage properties, could be within the downtown or outside of the downtown, because of course this program right now covers the entire city. It's not solely for the downtown in nature. So that certainly would be something that council could consider, but we looked at the reinvestment of those savings as something different and that a separate choice council would make then if they chose to end the program.
Okay, Councillor Morgan.
Yes, I'd like to start off with just a couple of questions through the chair. My questions, it's probably best if you flip to Appendix A, which is the chart that kind of delineates the budget effects of the various options. So my understanding is the difference between options 1 and 2 is that the industrial component is left in. One of them. And so that is the difference in cost. And same difference between 3 and 4. It's the industrial component. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
Okay, so I know that there were concerns expressed about the industrial component. It doesn't, to me, appear to be a very large part of the program. It looks like it's $109,000, if I'm reading it correctly. Is there a reason why that isn't first off, I appreciate that we have 8 options, but the one that seems to be missing is the one that you are recommending and then the option of potentially leaving in the industrial component. Again, the only reason I'm asking this question is because I know there were concerns expressed specifically about that component. It doesn't seem like it's a very large piece of the program. The main component is really the commercial component. Is there a reason why that staff didn't include that in the one of the recommended options, or do they not see the same concerns with the industrial component that some of the feedback showed?
If I can respond to the chair, I think that is correct. The industrial component is not a significant portion of the vacancy rebate program. The concern was expressed, I believe, by the Chamber of Commerce and LEDC. They seem to express a special concern about the industrial sector. But when that information was presented to the LEDC, they had less of a concern when they saw it was not a significant rebate percentage or rebate amount. And I believe in the recommendations we made, we took that into consideration. We said it's not significant, so it is not a big issue to just group them together.
So just through the chair, just so I can clarify, the concerns that were expressed by the LEDC and the Chamber of Commerce were expressed before they knew the magnitude of the industrial component. In other words, they may have expressed concerns because they thought that this was a big rollback across many industrial properties across the city. What we can see from the report is that this is there's a very small uptake on this particular program. And so they did not have that piece of information when they wrote their correspondence.
I guess specifically the LEDC was the most concerned at our initial meeting. And as a result of that, I sent them a list of the actual rebates so they could review and see what was actually happening. And after they looked at that, they had less of a concern. In the case of the Chamber of Commerce, I don't recall that we got into a specific discussion about that issue, but I would expect they would have a similar reaction to the LEDC after looking at they did not get into the exact details of the individual rebates.
Thank you, and through the chair. So I appreciate the answer to the questions. That helps clarify. My initial thinking moving into this was it wasn't a large segment of the program, so if there were significant concerns, perhaps we want to keep that piece. Sounds to me like the concern was related to the potential speculation on the size of the program, which is not very big, and so the concern maybe isn't as expressed in the correspondence at the time. So that's very helpful for me because it gives me a little bit of thinking on my approach here, which was going to be slightly different coming into the meeting than it will be with this information. I'm going to let my colleagues speak because I wanted to stick to questions first, and I can enter into the debate when I've heard from some of my colleagues as well.
Councillor Helmer.
Thank you, and through the chair, I'm wondering about the number of properties sort of affected by the changes, particularly how it breaks down between the industrial properties and the commercial properties. I remember when we were talking about this last time, I think there was something like 1,000 rebates or something like that that had gone out in a year. I'm not sure if that's accurate. It seems like that's the number I'm recalling. But what I'm trying to understand is, you know, these changes would vary depending on the size of the buildings and all those things, but to get a sense of what the average impact would be of the phase out over time for properties. So there's 109,000 for industrial. Are there 10 properties or 20, or, you know, like, just to get a sense of what we're talking about, or if it's just one property that has a really big impact. I wonder if our staff could speak to that, recognizing that, you know, vacancy could change and it might impact different properties and so forth.
So if I understand correctly, you're looking for number of property by category. Do you have that data available, Mr. Logan?
I might have to look it up a bit here in the files I have, but my general recollection would be, I think there's something like under 500 properties in total that are eligible for a vacancy rebate.
Was that 500?
Yeah, that's my recollection. And the industrial share of that is quite small compared to the commercial. To the best of my recollection, that would be what it is roughly, if that's sufficient.
Yeah, that's helpful, and I think maybe the 1,000 is including the vacant land subclass reduction. You know, that was the notification grouping, so that makes sense that it's 500. So if we were to say that 450 of those properties were commercial, for example, you know, that's about $2,000 a property, you know, in the first year of the impact, and another $2,000 in the sort of second year of the impact of what's being suggested. So I think that's helpful for us to understand what are we talking about. I'm recognizing it's going to change a bit. I wonder if, through the chair, our staff could speak to how those expenditure budget impacts were forecasted and whether they include these sort of draft property tax changes that are in the draft budget now. Like what's the assumption around what's happening on the levy side? Because obviously these are all relative to what the taxes from these properties are, and so the changes would change as we change the budget. So I just want to check to see what the assumption is around 2018 and 2019 in terms of the overall tax levy.
Mr. Logan or Ms. Barbone, do we know if the assumptions are built in?
So through the chair, so the numbers that we have for 2018 and 2019 are based on the approved City of London budget. So you'll see on 2019 that it does go up slightly because we have some inflationary amounts built in as the expenditure may grow, but it isn't necessarily as a direct correlation with the tax increases, because at any given year, depending on the vacancy, we have some actuals that we report out through our surplus and mid-year monitoring reports as well.
Thank you, Chair. I see that Jeanette McDonald is here, and of course this is a program for the entire city, but you know, a large portion of the properties would affect downtown London. And I wonder through you, Chair, if we could ask for her comments as we're considering this recommendation.
Just being noted, it's not a PPM, so we have a letter from LDVA, and do you want to add anything to that, Jeanette? Is there a specific question, Mayor, that you'd like her to answer on it?
No, we've been through, I think, the communication, that's important. But of course, downtown London speaks for the businesses in downtown, and if she doesn't want to comment after reviewing a staff recommendation like this, that speaks volumes too.
Are you comfortable with the staff recommendation, Ms. McDonald?
Partly.
Can you stand up so we can all hear your glorious accent?
Sorry about that. Sorry about the accent. I can't help it. Partly, number 8 is great, and as Ms. Barbone said, the creation of a fund to incent occupancy and to, you know, preserve some heritage buildings in the downtown is probably a separate policy matter that we'd like to deal with. I think right now what we're dealing with is whether we're going to get rid of the vacant unit rebate, phase it out, or just leave it the way it is. And I would strongly say don't leave it the way it is, because it's not incenting occupancy. It was started to incent occupancy. It's not doing that. It's been in place for over 15 years, to my knowledge, and it really hasn't incented occupancy. It's become a line on financial statements that people receive the taxes back. And honestly, the vacant properties have an advantage of the fact that they're not assessed at their full potential anyway. So there's a lot of factors to be taken into place here. But I think the main thing is we're trying to avoid destroying heritage properties that are derelict in the downtown. And I don't think giving people back this rebate really helps. And then we face demolition. I think we should be able to incent people to get some of your money back as long as you're going to put it back into the properties. We don't have a heritage restoration fund. I think somehow we need to build one, and I think this is a really good way to start. So that's my 10 cents worth. Thank you.
Okay, that's helpful, and I would like some clarity, because I'm missing just a little bit. You talked to the vacancy rebate, but then you said we should have a separate policy specifically dealing with vacant heritage properties. Is that what you're suggesting?
Yeah, I think what I was getting towards was using the funds that we would normally have rebated and create a fund that's going to go back into the buildings again to incent heritage buildings to be retrofitted as opposed to demolished. And I think Ms. Birdman referred to that as being a separate policy item, separate from the vacant unit rebate, either being kept or phased out or just cancelled.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful. Mayor, you still have the floor. You all good? Councillor Van Holst.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Just a couple of questions through you. The first one, can this program be based on location?
That's a great question. Are we able to have a policy that is specific to location, or would we have to do it in connection, say, with one of our CIP, or how do you see that?
With respect to location, what can happen will be dependent on what the minister will approve as a regulation. I think we have seen one example, I think it's cited in the report about the city of Windsor, was trying to confine the way the program operated to the downtown BIA area. So presumably the minister did approve that. So it would seem that location can be utilized.
Okay, thank you. And with respect to the industrial portion of this, it seems like that's a small portion, perhaps about, it seems like about $100,000 is for industrial. Now, that may be reason for us to just keep it in, or reason for us to remove it if that's going to place a larger burden on a smaller amount of properties. So I'm not sure whether that's not the case, but if we wanted 8 to be applied only to commercial properties, then would this effect on the budgets be about $100,000 less?
Yes, I think that would be correct. Well, it would also depend on what you're doing. If you're maintaining the industrial program at the 30%, it would be roughly the $100,000. Yes.
Councillor Van Holst, sorry.
Thank you. Just going for the button. So maybe I'll follow up then with a question similar to that asked by one of the committee members, just on numbers. Do we have an idea how many industrial properties are applying for this? If you don't know, that's fine, but I'll ask if.
Yeah, since the last question, I did have a chance to check the numbers. The numbers I cited were roughly correct. About 450 are commercial, about 25 or something are industrial. As I indicated previously, the industrial rebate program is, when you really look at it, it is not large and would not appear to be significant in decision making.
Okay, so in the case of the industrial, at 25 and 100,000, that's about $4,000 each for those properties if we were to average it out. Thank you.
If I may, I have a couple of questions. I'm going to go to Councillor Helmer and Councillor Park for a second round. Can we go to the bottom of the Appendix A, and could you just walk us through, because I think this is one of these areas where the devil is really in the detail of it. And I want to make sure we fully understand what A, B, and C are saying in terms of, so a new building, as defined here, is one defined construction, okay, where the building permit is issued after December of this year, okay, and there's a new building. That's the easiest of definitions, okay? B is building additions, so where a commercial or industrial is, a building permit is issued. So that could be a renovation of an existing building, not necessarily an addition to an existing building. But it's also, and where is an increase in usable area. So that's not, so that means there has to be actually a physical, it could be adding a second floor, it could be adding 3,000 square foot off the back of a building. Those would be all considered. It's not either or. It's not just the retrofit of an existing building, correct? And the 3 years is...
That was the intent, that it would have to increase the square footage of the building in order to qualify for a vacancy rebate.
So let me throw a scenario out. So someone buys a unused vacant building that has been vacant for a long period of time, and their intent is to bring it back into useful use. But that's going to take some time for them to do that. So there's a change of ownership happening. And in some cases, that's the best thing we could expect. So now it could take, I mean, let's say they have to get building permits, rezoning, engineering. It could take a year and a half to get, or 2 years to get it back in. How does that figure into here?
The way it's worded, there would be no vacancy rebate eligibility until the building is complete and the area is expanded. That's the way the wording is designed.
The challenge I'm trying to understand is if they're not going to be they'd be getting a building permit, but they wouldn't be expanding the square footage. So they wouldn't be eligible under this, would they, for the vacancy rebate?
Yeah, yes, that's correct. They'd have to, the way we've worded it here, they would have to expand the square footage. So it would not just provide vacancy rebates to any renovation.
I'm glad the chair is asking about this, the sort of narrowing it down so it only applies to new construction, because I did want to ask about that through the chair to our staff. This is also not a huge expenditure line in the sense that it looks like it's about $200,000 regardless of, you know, whether it's phased in or not. So it seems like it's a kind of a fixed amount. I wonder how many properties we're expecting that to impact and what the rationale is for allowing the vacancy rebate, first of all, for new buildings only, and then also for the 3-year period. You know, why not 1 year? I can see some rationale for having some time to fill out a building, but I am in general having a difficulty with the sort of equity comparison between, you know, a new commercial building and an existing commercial building, and why they should be paying any different tax rate at all. So I wonder if our staff could just speak to that, because that is the recommendation, and I would like to hear a bit more about that. Thank you.
That is the purpose of it the modification would be as an incentive for assessment growth, and it would provide a selling point for entities like the LEDC in attracting new business to the community. It actually came up as a suggestion in the feedback that came back from the industrial sector. There were, and it's quoted in the report there was a letter received by the city by a person in the industrial sector who pointed out that when they do new construction, they try to plan ahead for multiple years. And as a result, they would overbuild with the anticipation that they will fill in the space over time. And we went through an example with the company that sent this letter, and they actually had done that in years past, where they had overbuilt and claimed a vacancy rebate for approximately 3 years. And the basis of the rebate was they were waiting to expand their operations. So the logic behind it is, again, you know, it's tax policy issues. One of the motivations of tax policy is to encourage economic development, and that fits in that category. You were referring to another aspect of tax policy, which is equity. And I guess the equity issue is that every new property would be eligible for that for a limited period of time. And if you look back in history, I guess all sorts of properties in the city have had that eligibility in the past. So it's just being provided to new buildings that come into the city as well.
Anything further?
Yeah, so I think that's helpful. Certainly 3 years seemed like a long time, for example, for someone who's gonna build a commercial building. I don't think anyone's planning to leave their premises vacant for 3 years, or expecting to. And I was wondering where that was coming from, because, you know, it seemed very unusual to have that long of a period. I think it makes sense when you're thinking about a larger industrial building. It could take longer to fill that out. I'm not totally convinced that this is necessary. You know, even if we were to consider that maybe it's probably a smaller number of applications per year. One of my concerns is even maintaining the infrastructure for accepting applications and reviewing them. If we're talking about, you know, 10 or 15 applications a year, it seems like a very, very small program that's benefiting a very small number of property owners, and whether it's really worthwhile to even have staff on it as a way of managing the program. So I'm going to think about that. I appreciate the answers from Mr. Logan.
Great, thank you very much. So regarding my comments earlier, I'm not sold on number 8. I would move more toward option 1, where we phase it out over 1 year. Any company that's coming to town or already in town, I think that they should be developing a more just-in-time model for building out buildings, making sure that they have tenants in place. I don't see why the taxpayers of the City of London should be subsidizing their business growth at that point. This is something I fundamentally disagree with. So I would move that we go with option 1, and with an added direction to staff that they report back on options for what council can decide on what to do with the savings with phasing out this program. So the clerk has the verbiage on that, so I'd move that.
Okay, Councillor Morgan.
Yes, so I'm going to make a couple of comments, and then I'll comment on Councillor Park's direction. In my ward, there are commercial properties because it's a high growth ward. A dentist, for example, created her dental office and added a bunch of extra stalls. Not for today, but because she knows it's a growing area, and that portion of her business remained empty. And as the business ramps up over years, she's adding the equipment into those stalls and actually bringing that space online. And so I think there are commercial examples of where this would be relevant outside of the industrial space, particularly in areas of the city that are growing, and sometimes the businesses need to expand as the population comes in, and it isn't just the downtown. So I see the staff logic in trying to, you know, incentivize, you know, that planning ahead and people bringing businesses to the city in that way. Again, I don't see it as a very large portion of the program at all, and if the LEDC thinks it's something they can use to sell the city and it's a very low cost, then I certainly can support that being part of the recommendation. I do have a concern with number 1. First off, I don't have a concern with phasing out the vacancy rebate, but I have a concern with number 1 and the speed at which we do it. I think that there are I think that we need to do two things with the planning. One is we need to signal an exit from the vacancy rebate program so that businesses have a chance to modify their business structures and make the arrangements to try to populate those spaces. And two, I actually think the debate and the discussion about what to do with the money is an important one, one that is one of opportunity costs in the budget cycle. And I would like to see that land in the budget cycle in the proper way. If we phase it all out now, then we're going to go into this budget cycle potentially with the public participation meeting later this week. It just seems all very tight for a robust discussion from a budget perspective on how to spend that money. I don't mind doing it next year. Phasing it out would allow us to maybe just recoup the savings this year and then talk about the remainder and how to use that in the subsequent budget cycle, which is a majority, I guess half of the fund. So I think that there's an advantage to having a discussion on this. I appreciate that it is money that we've collected and we're basically giving it out for a reason. There should be always a very good reason to give it out. And I think we should also debate, what else we could give it to as part of a budget discussion, like every other new program that we would want to discuss. And so I'm not a fan of phasing it out immediately without a plan to deal with that. But I would support phasing it out under an option similar to what the staff have recommended.
Okay, Councillor Van Holst, did you want to speak again?
Thank you very much. I'm still debating myself about removing at all the industrial portion of this program. Although I think with the possibility to have new builds be exempt from the taxes for a portion, I think I'd be happy with this. I was going to provide an example, but I think Councillor Morgan's example about the dentist's office applies to a company that could put in, 1 or 2 or 3 lines at the same time, or build enough space for that, knowing that they'll ramp up production and they'll ramp up sales and they'll be able to fill those. And I think it's certainly an advantage for us to have that there rather than build a smaller plant and then expand someplace else. So I think this addresses that pretty well. So I think I'm fine with 8. I'll probably support that, but I'll listen to the rest of the committee's debate.
Councillor Helmer.
Thank you. So I think I'm through the question part of my comments. I like option 1 in general, and I want to speak just briefly about the rebate program and how it gets paid for. So what we have now is some properties get rebated on their taxes, and the way that gets paid for is from the general tax revenue, which is paid for by all the other properties and the property that gets the rebate, right? And so if you can imagine, you think about one specific example, it's like a dentist's office, for example. Obviously, there are a lot of properties that are contributing to the property tax levy, but it includes all the other dentists and all their dentist office. And so you've got a situation where a new dentist has built a new building, and they want to expand down the future, and they're smart. They build the building all at once, and they have a little bit of excess space. And some of the people who are paying for that are the other dentists that they're competing with, who have fully occupied buildings and pay the full property taxes. The property taxes, we should be raising property taxes in a fair way. And for me, that is the primary concern. I know there are multiple concerns across property tax policy, but equity is a really important one for me, to make sure that horizontally we have equity across properties within a given property class, and that also between the property classes that people are paying appropriate shares, and that there's a fairness there as well. So I think Deputy Mayor Hubert actually was making a very good point when he was asking about, so if you add space, you could get the rebate, but if you renovated an entire building and made it more usable, and you're not adding any space, there's no rebate. In the time period where you're doing the renovation, for example, you still have to pay the full property tax hit. And I think, that has its own effect, right? Which is to say, we think the new building construction is great, but renovating buildings not so great. And I'm not sure that that's really the message we want to be sending. And frankly, the property tax policy is the way of doing that. I think that's why I want to back out of this whole thing altogether, is that I don't know that the rebate program is the way to do that. If we want to do something positive to incentivize something around renovations of buildings or construction of new buildings, we should probably have that as a program that stands alone and isn't a rebate program, it's some other kind of expenditure program. So I'm interested in phasing them out. I think phasing it in a stepwise way, like gradually, is appropriate, because for the properties that are being impacted, it's not an insignificant impact, and certainly for, you know, a collection of properties owned by one owner, it could be a large amount of money over time. So I think phasing it out is appropriate. So I don't want to do, for example, option 7, which is just say it's over at the end of this year, there's no more rebates. I think that would be too abrupt. I think option 1, where it's, you know, the expenditure impact is around 900,000 and then it's about 1.8 million, I think that's really appropriate. And I don't know about the new building component. I know that we've had a number of interventions and feedback from industrial property owners about every time we talk about development charges, tax policy, they're very tuned into what we're doing, and they certainly share their opinions. And I understand why it's helpful to those property owners and builders to have a tax policy that's preferential for them. Like, I mean, I get it. They want it to be a bit cheaper, and it helps them in terms of London being a more competitive place when they're looking to where they want to operate. I continue to believe that these are very small impacts that don't have a huge, I don't think they have a huge impact on what these people actually decide to do. And I think if we set an example on this front, that perhaps other municipalities will follow us, and they won't. So I'd rather that we collect revenue, all do that fairly, than one of us make a bit of a move this way to be more competitive and then see other municipalities follow us so that they're doing the same thing. So I support the idea that Councillor Park brought forward to do option 1. It does phase it in so that it's only 15% in 2018 and then it's 0 in 2019. I think that's a good phasing. On the other option, which we did not discuss, this is about the vacant land subclass reduction. I think we do need to have a discussion about that. I don't want to make the change now. I think it's more appropriate that we wait till we have our tax policy discussion in the spring. That will give a bit more time to get a sense of what other municipalities are doing. I also do think we need to phase that out. I don't really think that the argument for maintaining it is that strong, but I think there's no need to rush. We're gonna make our tax policy changes then anyway, and we might as well do them all together as part of a package rather than doing something now. So those are my comments, and I see Councillor Park wanted to move that motion when it comes up. I certainly support it.
Thank you, Chair. I think as we work our way through this discussion and through this report, you know, we're all asking ourselves, you know, what's our goal? And certainly the goal of a program like this would be to increase occupancy and also to find equity. And I don't, looking at the history of this specifically when we look at downtown, but also globally, see that it's working in any way. And so are we achieving our goal? We're not. This is a tool that we put in the toolbox, and it's a tool that we don't need. It is a significant rebate. A couple of speakers have already said this in its totality. And as a former treasurer used to say, who's now performing another role, somebody always pays. And so when we have a rebate for one, then we have a cost for another. And that's where the equity piece comes in, that this is being subsidized by the taxpayers of London. And I think we all have some level of agreement on that. If we rebate here, we expense line there. And we also know that the rebate's not working. So it comes down to pace, I think, and that's really what this discussion has been based on. And I think at this point, I'm certainly not ready to jump in and say that it's gone in 2018. But when I look at option 1 and you see that phased-in approach, it signals very clearly to the community that we're moving in this direction, and it also paces it out over a period of 24 months. I'm also excited about the next discussion that we're going to have. We're not going to have it here today, but that is, what is an incentive program that could have a really positive effect on occupancy? And now we'll have some resources to put behind that. We also have spent many frustrating debates, particularly at planning, when we talk about you know, the challenge that heritage buildings present to our community. And we have a lot of people who are passionate about the heritage structures in our community. I know that all of us are, and how frustrating it is to know that we don't have resources to come through and to really support preservation and restoration in a serious way. And so this door opens the option for a portion of whatever dollars are redirected from this rebate to that discussion. I think that that's not one we'll have today, but it's an exciting one. And so, again, Councillor Park has been leading on this one for several years. I'm glad that she brought forward the motion that she did, and hearing from our friends with Downtown London indicating you know their overall comfortability with a program like this, I'm inclined to support option one.
If I may, I'm of a different mind. And I have some real concerns about unintended consequences of this. And option one seems really, given that we're sitting 6 weeks from 2018, seems really quite quick from a fairness point of view. And I'm not concerned about, I saw the list that, you know, the Chamber of Commerce had consulted with. I'm not so concerned about those folks, to be honest with you. But what I am concerned about is the small landowner who is buying a building and trying to bring it back into useful. And that's really where we want to go. I think of Old East Village. I think of all of our now 4 BIAs, and how do we rejuvenate and how do we create a program that incentivizes people to buy a building, and it may not, particularly in heritage areas, there's no room to expand the building. It's constrained, and to bring it back into usefulness. And so that causes me a concern. And some of those people are anticipating a 30% reduction, and that may be part of already their budgeting for 2018. And I'm not sure it's from a fairness perspective to change something that close to the time without giving businesses an opportunity to, because it's for the large companies, it's not an issue. But for a small landlord, it's a cash flow issue. And it's cash is king. It's what enables them to do that. And when they get into particularly heritage, and I know from personal experience, you open the floor and you never know what you're going to find underneath it. And your cost escalates as part of that, and we're increasing their costs. And to me, that can serve as a lack of incentive. And I know we know the nuts and the bolts of how much it is, and we can do it's only this much and that much. But in business, it's not so much about the reality, it's the perception of reality. And we have to be careful that we don't create a perception of reality that is not favorable to having happen exactly what we want to have happen, which is buildings and Councillor Helmer, I mean, I know a number of them in Ward 4 and Josh up in Hyde Park. It's, this is what we want to see. So I really want us to really just make sure we're not creating a disincentive and actually having an unintended consequence. The industrial, I totally get that. I would be okay if it was left out. I know it's not a huge thing, but I understand that businesses think and they have to maximize the capital investment. So, from an architect's perspective, it's, if you do a small project that's $100,000, your fees may be 10, 11% of that. But if you're doing a $1 million, the fees may drop to 5%. Because it basically, you have to deal with City Hall once, and you have to deal with all the permits once, and all those sorts of things. So there's cost efficiencies to be had by building on a larger scale, even though it will fill in over a period of time. So there is a mover and seconder, and I believe this is option one. So I won't be supporting that. And I would be supportive of 8 and actually would have preferred to see a phasing out over a 2-year period. And I want us to really, and I'm in support of many of the other elements for us looking at how do we help heritage buildings, I'm totally on for that. But when we change this close, and it's going to affect people's cash flows into the new year, I think we have to think about that. So that's where I'm at on. I just, and people can do what they want, don't have to debate back with me, but I have some concerns about unintended consequences.
Thank you, and I'm glad that the chair raised the impact on smaller businesses, and I wanted to just speak briefly to the work that the Oldies Village BIA did in terms of canvassing their members and the property owners in that area. Not just property owners, but also the business operators, some of whom are renting from property owners. And I thought, first of all, a huge amount of work went into it, and I want to give thanks to the BIA manager, Jen Pistorius, and also the treasurer, Ken Keene. He used to operate a business on the corridor. He has sold that business, but he went door to door talking to people about this issue and getting their feedback directly, explaining what is going on, talking to them about some of the trade-offs and getting their feedback. And frankly, that's why the response rate is so good. And these were fairly intensive, time-intensive surveys, not just like send it around by email and get feedback. And I think it's worth looking at the results. Property owners who had identified as using the rebate, lots of them actually wanted to get rid of the program. So these are people who benefited from the program in the past, and they're like, yep, you should get rid of it. Because they get why it's incentivizing the wrong things, and they supported getting rid of it. So there were 3 who had used it in the past 3 years. 2 stated it should be eliminated. It should not be eliminated. 1 said it should be removed immediately. So this is someone who just got one, and they said, get rid of it right now. There were 5 property owners who, 8 property owners who had never used it. 4 of them said it should be eliminated immediately, and 4 of them said you should phase it out. So really, like, there's a lot of people who are saying, don't even phase it out. Like, this needs to end right now. And I think that is helpful feedback. The business operators as well were surveyed, and you can kind of get a sense of what their feedback was. So, this is an area, and I have to recognize the BIA, they brought forward getting rid of the vacancy tax rebate years ago. Years and years and years ago. That's something they wanted to do to kickstart the revitalization in that area. They thought this was a perverse incentive that was kind of incentivizing the thing they're trying to fix. They want to get rid of it. They're really excited, frankly, that this has come forward now. And I do think that there's some concern about, what will the impact be? And I think that's why we need to phase it. And I think having that step is appropriate. I'm glad that Deputy Mayor Hubert is keeping that in mind, the impact on the smaller operators. I think it's really important. But I did want to point out that, the feedback we've got from the small operators in Oldies Village is that get rid of this thing, the faster the better.
Okay, if we can start to converge towards the resolution, Councillor Morgan.
Happy to converge. So when I came to this meeting, my preferences was 8, 2, and 1, given 2 was basically around the questions I asked around the industrial. I don't see that as a concern anymore. So my preferences was 8 and 1. So I'm going to support this only because there's a lot of things that I didn't support as much on this, and I want to be clear that I support getting rid of the vacancy rebate. This is not my preferred option, but we have a debate, we have a discussion that looks like the vote's going to go that way. I'm not opposed to one, it just wasn't my highest preferred option. I will say on E, which is the piece added in, I would like to know from the treasurer, who's been tasked with this, what does the timeline on this look like? My concern, as I expressed before, was making sure that we discuss, these sorts of things in the context of a budget process, given that the 2018 budget is now, that we're talking about it, and we're going to have some savings there. Are you anticipating being able to bring back something for the budget process, which we start debating, next week? Or I'm just wondering what the plan is for that.
Through the chair, that was actually a question I was going to raise. So there's 2 options. So right now, this amount of money is in the current budget. So there's 2 ways to do it. So if you're looking at the option of the phase out, there would be approximately $895 that would still remain in 2018's budget. So if the intent is to reinvest the full amount of the program and have a business case to support that, we would certainly be looking at trying to bring, my recommendation would be to bring a business case for 2019 so that we have ample time to develop something to reinvest those savings. And then you could look at it in the context of your 2019 business case and look at how that fits with the budget discussions. I'm not sure that there would be enough time to have a fulsome, so because the money is already there, if the intent is to reinvest the full $1.8 million, then the money is already there and we could come back at some point for the full program in 2018. Or if you're only looking at doing the portion for the 2019, which is the remainder of the phase out, then I would recommend we would do it as part of the 2019 budget and we would develop a business case for that. So you may want to clarify whether you're looking at the full investment of the program or only half.
I think regardless of how we clarify this, it's going to be a budget discussion. When we have budget pressures and people say, oh, $895,000 we might not need now. I think we're going to have the discussion regardless. Whether or not we have the discussion the way you're describing in 2019, I think that sounds like a very prudent thing for whatever remains. But I anticipate that regardless of the direction we give today, we're probably going to have a discussion about how to deal with that $895,000, which will not be needed in the 2018 budget when we debate this. So I think it's going to happen regardless. I just wanted to hear your comments on what your suggested or thoughts were on the approach and how you would deal with E.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you, a question to staff. I'd like to know how many staff resources would be freed up by eliminating this program. Seems to me if there's 500 of these applications, if they took half a day each to process, that'd be a full-time job for somebody. But I'm not sure. Could you let me know what removing this would do for our tax department?
Mr. Logan?
It will have some effect on workload in the tax department, that's true. It also, another consideration is changing the focus of what staff are doing. We probably haven't had enough time to do assessment review in the past. The assessment areas where this work is done. And I think that's becoming a more and more important issue all the time, is review of assessment and assessment appeals that are going on. There's always properties being appealed, and I think the issue of the losses on those properties is something that we need to delve into more. But I think there will be some clerical functions that will significantly be diminished as a result of this change. And
we're not going to go much further beyond that because you're dealing with HR and there's people in those positions, okay, in public session.
Thank you very much. That's, I know there's lots of work to do, and I think it could be better focused somewhere else.
Yeah. So I heard Mr. Logan say that people's responsibility would be refocused in other areas within the department. So thank you. Okay. Any other comments particular to the motion on the floor? I'm going to ask that A and B called separately, if you don't mind. Okay. So I am going to call A and B. Mover and seconder, please. Okay, go ahead.
Motion carries 4-1.
And C, D, and E. And we'll call that question.
Motion carries 5-0.
Councillor Park?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I've had a medical appointment that I could not reschedule for today, so I'll be taking my leave. I just have to get to the other end of the city to it. But thank you for the time in the meeting today.
Thank you, and we wish you well. All right, we've finished our consent items. So we'll go on to item 9, which is appointment to the Accessibility Advisory Committee. Are we doing a ranking on this? How would the committee like to proceed with this? We need 1 member at large, and we need 2 persons with a disability. What's the will of committee?
Sure, I think that if we deal with them separately, which we're gonna have to do, then you're really talking about 2 short ranked ballots, one with 4 candidates, another with 4 candidates. You know, one where you're choosing one where you're choosing 2. That's probably fairly quickly to get done. I will say when we get to number 11, I really think that we should take, you know, some nominations on that one, because we do not have enough
Yeah, short
voters.
list.
Yeah, you need to shortlist that one.
I-
There's too many candidates.
I would concur.
Okay, so,
The one challenge, Councillor, is that you'll note that the second group of 4 also would like to stand as a member of large if they're not selected as, so maybe what we should do is start with the bottom 4 and then proceed from there if we could. Okay, so we'll start with the bottom 4, which is for 2 persons with a disability, so there's room for 2 out of 4. Thank you. I should mention that Councillor Usher's not here today because he's at the Board of Directors of FCM. I'm reminded of that simply because there's a Facebook picture of having a very enjoyable lunch.
Now, Kathy will work on that if we want to do 10,
Okay.
and we can do 12.
The clerk has a great idea. We can do item number 10 while the clerk kind of plunks in the data. On number 10, we have only two candidates, is that correct? Clerk, can you clarify where we're
Yes,
at on that?
that's correct. We have 2 positions to be filled. We have 1 for each, but I do want to clarify that Caitlin Richardson, it's not actually the local business association tree-related business. She would be representing an active tree planting group, which has a vacancy.
Okay, so are we able to put both of them in? Is that okay? So why don't we just pass that motion, if my colleagues would be so good as to move in second and fight it out as to who's going to move and who's going to second.
I just want to say, we're not just putting them both in. They both seem like very good candidates. I think they're well qualified, and I think, you know, we can have I'd be happy to move both for those positions.
Motion carries 3-0.
And why don't we just jump to item number 12, we'll clear that off, which is the confirmation of appointment to town and gown of the Deputy Chief, Jack Burt. Discussion? Call it.
And then if you wanted to do the slate for.
Yeah.
Motion carries 3-0.
And could I take nominations from the list here of potential appointments for the Diversity, Inclusion, Anti-Oppression Advisory Committee? We do need 3 members, so I think what we look for is maybe 6. Does that seem reasonable? And then we can go from there. Any other thoughts? 7's a perfect number. 5, I'm easy either way.
Maybe you'll agree
Okay,
with 3.
I'll take nominations from the floor. Councillor Helmer.
I'll nominate Shobhita Sharma.
I'm sorry?
Shobhita Sharma.
Shomada? Yeah. Councillor Morgan?
That was actually who I was going to nominate. I didn't have anybody else so far.
Just
So unless you have names to nominate.
I have names. Mephisto Molath. Want me to keep going? Marilyn Prefontaine. Evelina Silveira. That's 1, 2, 3, 4. Anyone else?
So for the members, the names were Shobhita Sharma, Mephisto Lotha, Marilyn Prefontaine, and Evelina Silveira.
Could we add also Janeth Majorga? And I have to say, Councillor Helmer,
I just want to put on also Nicole Sharma.
okay, so 2 Sharmas.
Yeah.
I just have to say one thing. I'm really impressed with the depth of folks wanting to serve in this respect in our committee. It's really quite significant.
So again, for the members' reference, Shobhita Sharma, Mephisto Lotha, Marilyn Prefontaine, Nicole Sharma, Shobhita Sharma, Evelina Silveira, and that was it.
And it might be helpful to rank all of them. Okay.
That's 6. You should have 6 names.
Yep. Okay, do you have some news for us, Kathy? Okay, go ahead. And this is with respect to the 4 members with persons with a disability for the Accessibility Advisory. Can we flash it up on screen or? So we have Natalie Judges and Penny Moore. Okay, so I'll take a motion on that element of it. So these would be folks with a disability. Councillor Morgan?
Just a small request. I'm good with what's happened here. In the future, if we can be able to see the original ballot and kind of the ranking down of them too, that would be helpful to me. I just can't see it on this, but I would like to be able to see the original ballot and then the results.
I can show those to you. I saved each round as a separate file, so if you want to see the original and then the subsequent rounds, happy to do that for you now.
Sure, I would love to see that just flipped up for just a second.
So this is the original round, the first round. This is the second round. And that's the third round.
Thank you, that's very helpful. I appreciate that.
Call question. Okay.
Motion carries 3-0.
So, colleagues, we have now a list of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, okay? And we need 1 member from that. So perhaps I could take nominations of 3. Would that be reasonable from that group? Counselor?
I'd like to nominate Katie Schmidt.
So Katie? Okay.
I would like to nominate Wendy Lau.
Okay. Wendy? I'm going to ask, oh shoot, we don't have quorum. I was going to recuse myself because Wendy Lau is a colleague of mine that I work with regularly. So how do we deal with that?
You can recuse, but we can still vote.
Okay, very good. In a rank ordering? I won't be, it's going to make the rank ordering a little weird. So we could do it a different way, colleagues. We could send a slate of 3 and rank order at council. The rank order guru over there to advise.
Well, if only Counselor Helmer and I are voting, and I can't possibly speculate how he's going to rank his ballot, but given that he picked someone to put on the ballot and I picked someone to put on the ballot, it could be a two-way tie, 1 and 2, if you're recusing. So we could actually just proceed that way and then have that land to council, or we could just refer it to council.
I think we should recommend that this appointment be carried forward to the next meeting of Corporate Services Committee, and we can deal with it then.
I like that idea too.
That's an elegant solution. Thank you, Counselor. We'll do that. We'll send the one. Thank you very much. I just realized that I had that conflict at this juncture. So thank you very much. I can vote on that. Councillor Helmer, would you make the motion, please? Councillor Morgan? Okay, call the question.
Motion carries 3-0.
If I'm not mistaken, that's all of our work in public session, or was one other
Ms.
item?
Saunders is just entering the information for
yes.
number 11. You gave her the slate of 6. She's just
Yeah.
entering the results for the slate of 6. You could ask if there's any additional business.
My advice would be to corporations to not even bother doing MPP meetings.
At this stage, that's not a bad
Yeah, I can tell Martin, that was a shit show last week. Is there any additional business? Okay, we're just trying to fill in time here. Could tell a story. Music Career Day was, Music Career Day, first ever in city, was kind of cool on Friday last. Resilience Conference was interesting on Saturday as well. Music Career Day was fun. I took an old friend to welcome the colleagues, and it was my friend during high school and university, which was my viola. My members aren't even paying attention to a word I'm saying. So that was kind of fun. None of you probably knew that I was a viola player.
I knew that.
You knew that?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that was kind of fun. Neat things happening.
Can you play O Canada on the viola?
I used to be able to play O Canada on the viola. Now I just have to sing it.
We've got a
Counselor, how many
tribute.
combinations and permutations of 6 is there?
Permutations is 6 factorial, combinations is 6 factorial divided by 1 factorial, 5 factorial.
Six factorial, 720.
Sorry?
6 factorial, 720.
This goes back to when I used to have a radio show on CHRP, and the one thing you're not allowed to have is dead air.
We're talking about music. There was a new tribute to a band in London, Bob Noxious. On Hamilton Road, we now have a new tree trunk sculpture, which is a 12-foot Sasquatch standing on an overturned shopping cart with a guitar in his hand. So that's, I think, paying tribute to the song EOA, East of Adelaide. So there's our latest addition to the tree trunk tour.
And my understanding that's outside of the Home Hardware on Hamilton Road, is that correct?
It's exactly where it is.
Okay. Okay, folks, I'll take a motion on the 3 that have been,
This is round 1. This is round 2.
okay,
This is round 3. And this is round 4.
very good, thank you. There's no additional in canvas, is there? No.
Motion carries 3-0.
Well, thank you very much, and we do need to move in camera, but before we do, I would be remiss if I didn't thank our trustee clerk here for keeping me in line all year and doing great work, and thank you to senior administration. It's been quite a memorable year in the sense we have a new CAO, we have a new treasurer, we have a new city solicitor, and we have a new head of HR. So it's been quite, when you think about it, quite a bit of turnover on the other side of the fence here. So thank you all for your great work, and we'll see you in camera. I'll take a motion to go in camera.
Motion carries 3-0, and the reasons are as stated on the public agenda.